Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Rebecca Brown, and I am the ESSER Program Manager at the Office of Public Instruction. I'm here today to talk to you about some common e-grants and ESSER grant challenges and errors. This is going to be kind of a similar view of other presentations that I've given, but it will focus on common errors that I have seen within the last month since the last time I gave this presentation. This first part of the presentation will be recorded, and then at the end, I will open it up for general question and answer. At any point during the session today, if you have questions, please feel free to put in the chat whatever your questions are, and I will look at the chat at the end, and if I see your question during the slides, I'll answer your question then. So again, thanks so much for being here. Next slide, please. On this slide, I have contact information for myself as well as Wendy Fons. Wendy couldn't be here this morning, so I am presenting. But at any point, if you have questions and you don't want to put it in the chat, or you leave this session and you have a question later, please feel free to reach out to us. You can write us an email or give us a phone call, and we will answer as quickly as we can. Please recognize we serve over 400 Montana school districts and organizations through these ESSER grants, and so sometimes our inboxes get pretty full. So there may be a short delay in our response time, and if you go a while without hearing from us, just send us another email or give us another call, and we will respond as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. In this session, this is going to be about 1 mile wide and 1 inch deep. I am going to cover lots of different aspects of e-grants and the ESSER grants, and I will briefly touch on quite a few different things. I will also point to some previous guidance that we have given, which is posted on our OPI ESSER website, where you can go more in depth to find deeper answers to those questions. But this will just be kind of a short touch to make you aware of some of these common issues that we see. Next slide, please. So the first thing that we get lots of questions on is contact information within e-grants. There are times when a school will have a new clerk or a new superintendent, and that person will log into their ESSER grant in e-grants, and they'll look at the contact information page, and it has contact information from previous people who worked for that school district. And so the question we get is, how do I update this contact information? One thing that you do need to be aware of is that this contact info page is captured when the application was submitted. So for example, if you were to go all the way back in e-grants to like fiscal year 2017, like a long time ago, the grants that were submitted in 2017 captured the contact information of the people who submitted those grants. So even if you have updated your contact information in e-grants, your name won't be on those grants from 2017 because it is a historical capture of who was working on those grants. So just because your name isn't on the contact information page doesn't mean that you don't have the permissions. The other thing to note is that the boxes on this page that are grayed in, those are automatically filled in from the OPI contacts database. That is an OPI database where we have contact information of lots of different people from school districts. And so the superintendent or authorized representative and the district clerk or business manager, those pieces are pulled from OPI contacts and put into this page automatically, and that cannot be changed in e-grants. It needs to be updated in OPI contacts. So if we go to the next slide, this slide has information on how you can update that contact information and how you can adjust your security privileges within e-grants. I'm not going to go into this in detail. It is here, and we also have handouts on this on e-grants on the login page. We have them available by request. If you email myself or Wendy, we can send you those instructions, but just know that if your school district experiences some transition, if you have a new clerk or a new authorized representative, not only do you need to update the contact information and the security privileges in e-grants, you also need to update them in the OPI contacts database. Next slide, please. Another common question I get, especially from people who are new to the ESSER grants and new to eGrants, is where to find the ESSER grants. So right now we are in fiscal year 2023, but the ESSER grants are not located in fiscal year 2023. They are located in the fiscal year when the funding was established. So for the ESSER 1 grant, that is ESSER Fund and ESSER Related Services in eGrants, that funding was established in fiscal year 2020. So you can go to fiscal year 2020 to find those grants. The other ESSER grants, that's ESSER Consolidated, which is ESSER 2, ESSER 3 Consolidated, which is ESSER 3, and then ARP Summer and ARP After School, those, the funding were established in 2021, and so you will go to fiscal year 2021 to find those grants. It's a little confusing, but once you get used to the system, it'll be there every time. Next slide, please. Another question that I get is, how do I view the grant award notification? So when you are awarded your grant, regardless whether it's ESSER or IDEA or ESEA, in eGrants, you are given a grant award notification, or a GAN, that summarizes the grant that you were awarded. So you will go to the correct fiscal year that you're looking at. So for example, if you were looking at ESSER 2, you would go to fiscal year 2021. And then next to each grant, under the status column, you will see in blue letters, it says View GAN. Now, if your grant is being amended, if there's an amendment in process, it hasn't been approved yet, something like that, the GAN will not display in those moments because the grant isn't finalized. But once your amendment gets approved, then the GAN will display again. So that is a common question that I've gotten this month, is I can't find the GAN because the grant is being amended. So just be aware of that. Next slide, please. Another question that can cause some confusion between the different ESSER grants is the location of the budget pages. In ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, those are called consolidated grants, where there are multiple budget pages within the grant. So for example, in ESSER 2, there is ESSER Base, there's School District Supplemental, there's Special Needs, there's other educational institutions, there's multiple different budget pages. And instead of making a different grant in eGrants for each one of those budget pages, they were all put together into what is called a consolidated grant. So to find those different budget pages, all you have to do is, in the grant, you'll go up to the top right-hand side of your screen, click on the drop-down menu, and that will show all of the different budget pages within that grant. In the other grants, ESSER Fund, ESSER Related Services, ARP Summer, and ARP After School, those grants each only had one budget page. So instead of having a drop-down menu in the top right-hand side, you'll just click on the tab within the application that says Budget Pages, and then it'll show up right there for you. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Another question that I get is how you can find a summary of what has been paid out of your ESSER grant and what you have left. In the budget pages, you can see what was budgeted, and there is a very small view of what has already been paid out. But if you want a more detailed view, you can go to the payment summary menu. So when you're in the eGrants Access Select page, where you can see the fiscal year and all of the grants within that fiscal year, next to each grant, there is a blue button that says Payments. When you click on that Payments button, it opens up this Payment Summary menu that's pictured in the right side of your screen right now. And this Payment Summary menu shows you what you were allocated, what you have pending in process, so like cash requests that have been submitted but not paid yet, and then completed payments, how much has already been paid out, and then remaining payments. So in the screenshot on the right-hand side, this is from the ESSER Fund grant, that's ESSER 1, which closed this year. And so the screenshot that I took here shows that the school was allocated $92,488. They were paid $92,488, and they have $0 remaining. If you were to look at ESSER 2 or ESSER 3, a grant that you haven't fully spent down yet, instead of saying $0 remaining, you probably have a remaining balance, and you have some time to pay that down. But that's where you can see that. And then if we go to the next slide, In that payment summary menu, there is a blue button that says View Cash Requests Expenditure Reports. If you click on that button, it will open up this next menu, which is the Cash Request Expenditure Reports menu. And you can see all of the cash requests or expenditure reports that have been submitted within that grant. A note here, with ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, since those are consolidated grants that have multiple budget pages, you will need to select which budget page you are looking for, because you'll have cash requests within each budget page and expenditure reports within each budget page. But then once you select your budget page, you'll be able to see all your cash requests, all your expenditure reports. In the screenshot at the bottom of your screen here, there's only one cash request that has been submitted for the school, and there is no expenditure report yet. As a reminder, final expenditure reports for ESSER 1 must be submitted before you can receive funding, remaining funding for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. Those final expenditure reports were due on October 25th. We've been trying to call and communicate with schools and organizations who haven't gotten those in yet, but please just make sure that if you haven't yet submitted your FER for ESSER 1, please make sure you get that submitted. Next slide, please. And then within the payments menu, you can look at individual cash requests as well. So once you're in that menu, you can see all your different cash requests. There is a circle next to each cash request. You can select that circle to fill it in blue. And then after you select it, then you can click on Open Request, and it will open up that specific cash request, and you can see exactly what the cash request was used to pay for. Next slide, please. With amendments, there are 5 steps to this process. I'm going to touch on this very briefly. We offered a much deeper, more detailed training back in September. The guidance hasn't changed since then, but I did just want to highlight a few things on amendments today. There are 5 steps to this process. You will need to create an amendment. After you create it, you have to unlock the pages in your ESSER grant so that you can actually make changes. You'll update the budget pages to whatever the changes need to be. You will write an amendment description, and I'll touch on this more in just a second. And then after you've done those 4 steps, then you will submit. If you are a district clerk or business manager and you are not the authorized representative, when you hit submit, it will submit to your authorized representative, and your authorized rep has to submit to OPI. So if you are a clerk or business manager making amendments, please just stay in contact with your authorized rep. Let them know, hey, I submitted an amendment. I need you to submit it to OPI. Next slide, please. A little bit more detail on that amendment description. We have worked with multiple schools over many months to develop this amendment template with pieces that need to be represented in every single amendment description. So in red, you need here on your slide, you do need to put where money is being moved from, what category and how much money. And then I have in purple where money is being moved to, so what category and how much money. In blue, I have what is the purpose of moving this money. So what are you purchasing? What are you buying? What are you paying for? And then in green, I have a few notes here of why. Why is this being moved? How does it connect to the purpose of the grant in response, to prevent, to prepare for, and specifically, how does this benefit your students? The students are the intent of these grants, and so we always need to connect back to how are students benefiting. And then one last piece at the bottom of this slide here, if your amendment involves an item or project over $5,000, so remember that $5,000 is the threshold over which you need documentation of both board and OPI pre-approval. That involves the OPI pre-approval process. I have that linked in red down at the bottom here. We offered some training on that back in September, and we are going to update our guidance on that here in the coming month, just to make sure that we're really consistent and we have a good understanding of that to push out to you folks. But if your amendment involves that pre-approval process, you also need to include this language that is in yellowish orange at the bottom of your screen. You need to anchor on the title of the project, the date of board approval, and the date of OPI approval. All of this in this eGrants amendment template helps to establish a very clear and consistent audit trail, so that if and when an auditor takes a look at your ESSER grants, they can see exactly what was being changed and why it was being changed and how those changes relate to the purpose of the grant, so that ideally you will not receive any audit findings. And then as a note over on the right-hand side, your cash requests need to use the same language as your budget and amendments so that the cash request ties to the budget and amendments. And be aware that in the amendment description, you only get 500 characters, so you have to keep your description short and sweet. If you need some wordsmithing help, like for example, you have written and rewritten your amendment description and you cannot get it under 500 characters, give me a call, shoot me an email, and I will help you condense it down, abbreviate, whatever we need to do to get it to fit into that 500 characters while keeping consistent with this template. Next slide, please. After you submit an amendment, you may be curious where it's at in the workflow. In that eGrants Access Select page, there are status options you can see. There's 5 different options that you will be able to see. The first one is not submitted. So that means you created the amendment, but it hasn't been submitted yet. The next one is submitted for local review. So that's a situation where a clerk or business manager submitted it to their authorized representative. The authorized rep hasn't submitted it to OPI yet. The next one is submitted to OPI. That means that it has been submitted to OPI. It's on our side. We are reviewing it. And then the next one is final approved. So that means that OPI has approved your amendment and returned it back to you so that now you can make cash requests based on that amendment. The last status option that you'll see is returned for changes. So that means that OPI has reviewed it and there are some changes or fixes that you need to make. So we returned it to you so that you can make those changes and then resubmit to OPI. Next slide, please. You can also go back and view previous amendments, previous iterations of your budget in that eGrants Access Select page where you can see all of the grants within each fiscal year. You will click on the box, which is a drop-down menu next to the desired grant. So for example, in this screenshot, it's ESSER 3 consolidated. You'll click on that drop-down menu and you'll see, I've got it kind of zoomed in here, this grant has the original application and then amendments 1, 2, and 3, with Amendment 3 being the current amendment. But if you were working on Amendment 3 and you couldn't remember what you changed in between Amendment 2 and Amendment 3, you could look back at Amendment 2 and go, oh yeah, that's right, I moved $600 out of this category into this other category. Next slide, please. And then with cash requests, again, we offered a more in-depth training in September. The link to that is on this slide, and that training is on our OPI website as well. This is, again, just a mile wide and an inch deep. When you create a cash request in that cash request expenditure report menu, if you're in ESSER 2 or ESSER 3, remember you need to select the right budget page that you're trying to request out of. You'll click Create New Request, and it'll start a cash request. If we could zoom in a little bit here, please. There are different line items that you can fill in, and in each line item, you have an object code, use of funds, expenditure description, and itemization. Then the final approved budget and previously requested, you don't fill those in. Those get automatically filled in by eGrants. And then the cash request column is how much you are actually requesting. And then if for whatever reason you make a mistake, you need to get rid of a row, there is a delete row checkbox over on the right-hand side. So you'll create line items for all the expenditures you wish to purchase. You can create a different line item for each budget category. So like if you were doing salaries and benefits, you would have a line item for 100, which is salaries, and a line item for 200, which is benefits. Remember, over on the right-hand side here, your cash request language in the expenditure description and itemization column has to match the descriptions that are in the grant. If your grant says you've budgeted $2,000 to purchase Chromebooks, but your cash request says that you are using $2,000 to purchase iPads, That is not the same. That does not connect. And so your cash request will not be accepted. You have to match what is in your grant. And if your school or organization has changed what you're spending your money on, that needs to be a grant amendment before you can do your cash request. Then down at the bottom of your cash request, as you're done filling in the table, you need to enter an end period expense date. So if this was salaries and benefits for the month of November, then the end period expense date would be November 30th. Calculate totals at the bottom. That is when eGrants will add up all your totals. And then there is also a spot where you can upload documentation. So again, this connects to that audit trail. If you are using a cash request to pay for salaries and benefits, upload the pay stubs that cash request is paying for. If you use the cash request to pay for Chromebooks, upload the receipt where you paid for those Chromebooks. This is just documentation and evidence that you are using the grant for what you're saying you're using it for. Then after you've got it all filled out, you'll select Save Page, and then you will submit the cash request to OPI. When it comes to OPI, our grant accountants will review it. They will compare it to what is in your grant budget, and then either they will approve it and pay it, or they'll send it back to you so that you can make changes. Next slide, please. One thing that you absolutely have to pay attention to in your cash request is the use of funds column. This is the most common error when submitting cash requests. I hear about this all the time from our grant accountants. The use of funds in the cash request has to match what is in the budget in your eGrants grant. So if, for example, in the budget, you had object code 600 use of funds technology, and you had budgeted $2,000 for Chromebooks, but in the cash request, you had object code 600 and use of funds other $2,000 for Chromebooks, other in the cash request and technology in the budget, those aren't the same. And so what will happen is in the final approved budget column on the right-hand side, eGrants will go into your grant budget and look at what have you budgeted in there and pull that number. So if you put in the wrong use of funds, it doesn't match what's in your budget, eGrants is going to say, hey, you've budgeted $0 in this use of funds. That's a big red flag. If there's $0 in the final approved budget column, we cannot approve your cash request. So you got to pay attention to the use of funds column. Next slide, please. Another question that we get a lot is, what is the timeline for amendments and cash requests? All right. I want to begin here by saying, please remember, we serve over 400 Montana school districts and organizations. We get inundated with amendments and cash requests at the end of every month. Please be patient with us. These take time to process. All right. If you use the templates that we've suggested, it makes it a lot simpler for us to follow the thought process and approve. And if there's any points of confusion or we need more detail or more clarification, we will return it to you for changes. Please read our feedback and make those changes so that it can get approved in the next round. With cash requests specifically, the cash requests have to be submitted by the 25th of each month in order to be paid by the 10th of the next month. So right now, today, it is December 13th. If you were to submit a cash request today, that's before the 25th. And so that would be processed and paid out by January 10th. If you're behind schedule for whatever reason, the 25th of December is Christmas. So let's say you don't get the cash request submitted until the week after Christmas, you submit it on December 27th. At that point, that's after the deadline of the 25th. And so that means that the cash request will not be processed and turned around and paid out until February 10th. It will get processed, but it won't be until the next month. So please keep that in mind as you are trying to get cash requests processed and approved. As far as amendments go, there is no set deadline every month for amendments, but what you do have to keep in mind is the cash requests sometimes depend on the changes being made in the amendment. So if you have to make an amendment to your budget before you can get a cash request paid out, that amendment absolutely needs to be submitted before the 25th. I would say submit it as soon as possible so that there is time for OPI to process it and approve it or get feedback, so that you can do your cash request. So keep those deadlines in mind. Next slide, please. As far as finding the feedback, we have the ability on OPI's side of the grant to leave you feedback on your cash requests or amendments. This slide has to do with finding the feedback on amendments. So, excuse me. When you are in the eGrants Access Select page, instead of clicking on Open to open the grant, there is a blue button that says Review Summary. If you click on that blue button, it opens the Review Summary page, which is, can we zoom in here, please? On the bottom left of this slide, there's a screenshot of the Review Summary page. You can see the different steps of review that the amendment has gone through. The state agency final review, that's the last one. That's where OPI left feedback. So you'll select that one, and then you will click on Review Checklist. At this point, eGrants will open a second tab in your browser. This only works if you have your pop-up blocker turned off. So up in the top right of this slide here, I have a couple links to instructions on how to turn off your pop-up blockers. All right. But then after eGrants opens up that second tab, the second tab will be a review checklist. And on the right-hand bottom side of this slide, I've got a screenshot of a review checklist where we said Amendment 1 is okay, Amendment 2 is okay, Amendment 3 is okay. And Wendy and I, when we review these things, we try to anchor on our initials so that when you say okay, RB, you can see that RB, that's me, I'm the person who reviewed that amendment and said that it's okay. Again, that is just trying to establish a really clear, consistent audit trail. Next slide, please. As far as cash requests go, the process is pretty similar, except for instead of starting at the eGrants Access Select page, you'll start within the Payments menu. In the Cash Request Expenditure Report menu, you'll select the cash request, you'll click on Review Summary, it'll open up, excuse me, the summary of the review process that it's gone through. You'll select the SEA and click on Review Checklist. eGrants will open a second tab, and in that second tab, you'll be able to see the feedback. Next slide, please. All right, this question came up a lot this month. How do I submit my FER? The final expenditure report needs to be submitted at the end of your grant. So ESSER 1 just ended this year, and so the ESSER 1 final expenditure report, or FER, needed to be submitted to close out the grant. All right, you can find the FER in the same menu as all of your cash requests. It's the Cash Request Expenditure Reports menu. One really important note is that you have to have at least one cash request that's been both approved and paid before you can submit your FER. eGrants will not allow both a cash request and an FER to be processed within the same month. Excuse me. So please make sure that you are requesting your money and spending down the grant before the very end. And we did offer some in-depth training back in November. That is on our website, and the link is linked on this slide. Next slide, please. Error messages in eGrants. If you get a red error message, please take the time to read it carefully. These error messages are phrased to be as helpful as possible. We offered some really in-depth training on specific error messages that we see a lot in eGrants. Mindy did a great job with that training in October. That's linked on the slide. It's on our website. But just some reminders before panicking, before you call OPI for help, please check these 3 things. Make sure that you're using either Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge as your browser. Those are the 2 browsers that work the best with eGrants. Make sure that your browsing history has been cleared for whatever reason. Sometimes that fixes issues or challenges within eGrants. And then also make sure that your pop-up blockers are turned off. And again, I have instructions linked on this slide. Those 3 things will generally solve a lot of problems in eGrants. But if you've read the error message, you don't understand what it means, and you've done these 3 things and you're still getting problems, then call OPI. We will be happy to help you. Next slide, please. 2 places that you'll see error messages. One place would be on the individual tab. So in this green screenshot here, you can say, or you can see that there's an error message that is specific to the contact information tab. The second place that you'll see error messages is on the Submit tab. So when you go to submit your grant and you run a consistency check, the consistency check will, if there are any errors, it'll display on the Submit tab. And then at that point, you can go back, fix the errors, and then come back and submit your grant. Next slide, please. A really common one that we see is that a page is locked. So after you submit an amendment or submit your grant, it locks the pages so that you can't make changes while OPI is reviewing, which makes sense. But then when OPI sends it back to you, you have to unlock it before you can make any other changes. So to do that, you'll go to the Page Lock Control tab, click on Expand All so you can see all the pages in your grant, click on Select All so that you're unlocking all the pages in your grant, and then you have to click the Save button at the bottom of your screen in order for those to stay unlocked. The other place that you can unlock pages is on the Submit tab. So when you run a consistency check, it locks your application. If the consistency check finds any errors, you can unlock the application on that Submit tab. It is possible that the AR may have to unlock the application on the Submit tab. Sometimes we run into an error where the clerk or business manager doesn't have that permission. So if you run into that, just ask your AR to log in and see if they can unlock it. And again, if that doesn't work, then you can call OPI. Next slide, please. Another big one we've seen recently is that the amount budgeted doesn't equal the total cost. And this has to do with object code 700. So 700 object code is property, like capital expenditures, big projects, that type of thing. And when you put an item into object code 700 in the budget detail page, that number auto-populates in the property and equipment page. And the property and equipment tab is where you can specify exactly what is being paid for within that 700 line item. So in the screenshot at the bottom of your screen here, you can see that in the budget detail tab, 144,000 was budgeted in object code 700, but in the property and equipment tab over on the right-hand side, only 35,888 has been accounted for. Those two numbers don't match. That's an error message that eGrants will kick back. So all you have to do is update the property and equipment tab with those specific expenditures. Next slide, please. Finally, not all red messages at the top are bad. This screenshot was taken from the consistency check page on the Submit tab. After running the consistency check, the top few are issues that have to be fixed before you can submit. But if you look down at the bottom where it says School District Supplemental Passed Consistency Check, that's a good thing. That is not a problem. That page is ready to submit. So just read those error messages carefully, make sure you understand what they are saying to you, and put that into practice. Next slide, please. We have lots of resources for you at our OPI website. That is opi.mt.gov. If you go to the homepage, there's a big blue ESSER button on the bottom right. That will take you to the ESSER webpage where we have tons of resources for you. If you spent any time on that webpage, you know there is a lot of information out there. We recently updated the ESSER webpage to make it a little bit easier to navigate and find what you're looking for. But if you ever are on the ESSER webpage and you know something should exist and you can't find it, please just reach out. We'll be happy to help you. The other thing that I have linked on this slide is where you can find the eGrants login page. I have the direct link here, but you can always find it by going to the OPI website, clicking on leadership, and then it's under finance and grants. I've got it circled over on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. I just want to put a reminder out there. We are hosting office hours December 15th and 16th. That is this Thursday and Friday. We have two different office hours sessions. We've got one that will be a little bit more specific to superintendents and one that will be a little bit more specific to clerks. On this slide, I have a link where you can register for those office hours. If we could also put that link in the chat, I will give you just a second here to take a screenshot or write it down if you would like to. And we will also put it in the chat. Give me just a second here. On the slide, I have a little bit longer or shorter link. The one that's in the chat is the full link. Either one of those will work. It will take you to the exact same place. But if you have specific questions and you want to work one-on-one with Wendy or with me, we encourage you to register for those office hours. We really look forward to meeting with you. If Thursday and Friday doesn't work, you can always email us or call us and we'll work through it with you on the phone, over email, or we can schedule a specific Zoom meeting for you. And if we go to the last slide here, please. I have contact information here, for Wendy, for myself. You can ask Wendy or myself any questions that you have about the ESSER grants or things within eGrants, your school plans, anything related to ESSER. And then on this slide, I also have contact information for Mindy Askelson. Mindy is our eGrants designer. She works with multiple different grants within eGrants. And so if you are having eGrants technical errors, you can talk to Mindy. But as far as ESSER questions, please reach out to myself or Wendy. At this point, we're going to stop the recording and I'm going to open it up for a question and answer. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.